This is Bible School Radio, KDKR, Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, KYJC, Commerce, and KMWC, Bethany. Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, could major shakeups in the Department of Education drastically affect student loans? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, President Trump is ushering in major changes in the Department of Education. What effect could this have on student loans? Well, today John Hupalo is here to give us his thoughts. John, always good to have you on the program.
Bob, great to be with you this afternoon. Thank you.
I got to tell you something funny. I was thinking about this. Is that the last couple of years, we always have to get content up every day for the program. In the last couple of years when Biden was president, it was slim. Some of the, as far as what the president's doing, except for student loan debt. Now we've got President Trump in there. There's all kinds of stuff to talk about. And lo and behold, there's even more to talk about student loan debt and student loans and what's going on. I mean, it's amazing when you see this amount of change, whether it's intentional and he's actually going to do it or not. You're talking about the Department of Education that this affects 42 million federal student loan borrowers, feeling a little uncertain about what's going to happen. And it also, if you look at what the department's functions are, they're underwriting the loans that enable millions of people each year to attend college and grad school, also takes care of the $1.6 trillion outstanding education debt. So what could go wrong?
Bob, you're right. And I saw the movie A Complete Unknown. It's the Bob Dylan movie. Over the holidays. And the reason I'm bringing this up, he sang so eloquently, the times they are a-changing. And I can't help but think the times are changing. It's pretty remarkable.
Well, thank you, and thank you for not singing that. So first of all, I guess let's start at the beginning. Why is the Department of Education under such fire right now?
Well, Bob, it's really interesting. This is an old story, just totally inflamed by the fuel that the president can throw on whatever it is he wants to ignite. In 1979, Jimmy Carter actually formed up the Department of Education. We had loan programs and other things, but he said, okay, we've got to get a focus on this. The Department of Education was formed in 1979. In 1980, then candidate Reagan was campaigning to abolish it. When he started his term, he let a few years go by and said, by the way, they're really not doing anything over there, Department of Education. I want to get rid of it. So he tried. He was right within a few years. And, of course, when President Trump came back for his first term, it was on his agenda, and he wanted to actually move that whole function to the Department of Labor. So this is an older conversation that's taken on a new life for a bunch of reasons, and not the least of which you probably saw these test scores for kids, U.S. kids in reading are sinking quickly. So there's a lot of fodder for that, and also it's one of the conservative Republicans, standard bearers of we want smaller government. We don't want the government telling us how to educate our kids. So this is a great flashpoint, and we're going to have to see how this works out.
It's interesting, and this is pure speculation, but it's just I get this just by watching him. I'm sure you'd agree. It comes down to when these changes are acted upon, it's speed and efficiency. And I can only imagine that you with as big of a move as that would be, or I can only imagine that it can't be speed, it can only be efficiency, and efficiency is going to come real slow. I mean, what if he underestimates the magnitude of such a change? I mean, that I don't think anybody really knows that because nothing like that's been done, right?
Well, that's right. But the other side of that is that I think you might agree with me that for the last 2 weeks and a few days, we've been in the shock and awe part of the campaign. It's very much like when you start a war, drop as many bombs as you can to see like how the other guy is going to blink. And so, we've seen all kinds of things about Greenland and Panama. The tariffs came for a day and then they were put on the side. This Gaza announcement yesterday. So I think we are in that shock and awe part right now. But it's going to settle out, and it is going to take some time. For instance, I don't think there's anyone, I'm going to say this, maybe with the exception of one or two people in Washington, there aren't others who believe that you can just go and close the Department of Education. It was set up by the Congress. There's going to have to be some process at some point. But the other part of that is that how would you like to be Linda McMahon? We talked about her last time. She is a designee to be the Secretary of Education. When we talked last time, it was very early in the month of January, and at that moment, she hadn't given in all her paperwork, so there wasn't yet a confirmation hearing scheduled. And guess what, Bob? 30 days later, same status. So it makes me wonder that if there might be more coming behind this, because they don't seem to be in any hurry to get her confirmed. And we'll have to see that, maybe with what we're seeing in Doge, and what Elon Musk is doing and behind the scenes, and what the president's folks are doing from the White House, and what the Republicans in the Congress are doing, and I think in a little bit more concerted effort than we might on the outside understand. They might have a plan for the department already, and we're just going to have to let some time go by and see how it plays out.
I'm not that impressed with a lot of who he's bringing on as his cabinet, except for her. She is legit. She's an incredible businesswoman, so it'll be interesting to see her take the reins of this and do. President Trump could not have picked a more perfect person.
This thing that you bring up around the department, and the reason I said that about Linda McMahon the way I did, is that I'm not sure she'll be installed or be confirmed, because they may have some other plan that might come out.
Right.
That sounds a little far-fetched, but in the last few weeks we've learned there's not much that's really that far-fetched. So we'll have to see. It's just odd to me that someone didn't get the paperwork in, and here we are a month later, and they still haven't gotten their paperwork in. And she's very close to the president, done a great job, did a lot of work with him in other ways.
Right.
So I'm just thinking maybe there's something else boiling around out there. Maybe we'll talk about this next month and there'll be a resolution.
Well, I think you're absolutely right about the shock and awe. He makes it, everything is a grand move, and to his credit, he gets a lot of attention for what he brings to the table. So it'll be interesting when things do settle down and see what happens. But at this point, let's look at the potential moves. First, privatizing student loan debt. What would that look like?
Yeah, it's interesting, Bob. I like the way you frame this, because there is a lot going on underneath the surface.
Yes.
I kind of hinted at that before,
Yes.
but what are they doing in the Congress and all that? But that's one of the there's a fundamental discussion that's going to go on, and I think it's a healthy one, which is, okay, if we have these scarce dollars, how are we going to get them into the hands of the people who really need them? And I'll say it this way, should Bill Gates's kids be eligible for a federal loan, right? They can go out and they can get a loan anywhere they want if they need one. So this question about who gets what and how it's going to be allocated, I think, will be really interesting. But one of those underlying things that's going on in Washington right now is this around the extension of the debt ceiling and the budget and all. There's going to be some kind of budget reconciliation bill that's been boiling around. And there are 4 pieces in there that are actually really interesting. One is repealing Biden's SAVE program. We've talked about that before. We can talk some more. Also eliminating, and this is where you're going, I think, the Parent Plus loan. That's a really interesting thing. They want to also take out the student loan interest rate deduction. You get a deduction for $2,500 of student loan interest that's paid. And then there's a sneaky one in there, Bob, about increasing and broadening the tax that they have on endowments that universities have. Right now, about 58 or 60, I think it's 58 is the number, of universities in the country meet some threshold, and they pay a 1.4% tax on their endowment earnings. In the reconciliation bill, they've increased that tenfold to make it 14%. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and that kind of stuff will stick a lot quicker than dismantling the Department of Education or all the sort of high-profile stuff that you're seeing in the news right now.
So talk about, and my memory doesn't serve me on this one. They took over the private loans for college, for student loan debt back during the financial crisis, correct?
Yeah, that's about right. It was previously set up that the Department of Education would guarantee the loans through this mechanism that includes some state agencies and the like. But at the end of the day, the federal government was paying a large portion of the defaults on a loan. And the makers of those loans, the federal loans, under what was called the FELP program, FFELP program, were banks. So I could go to Bank of America, Chase, or any of the local banks in Texas, wherever you were, and they participated in the student loan program. And as a student, I'd get my loan. It would be guaranteed by the federal government. And then what would happen is the banks would bundle up all these loans and sell them to investors, or they'd hold them on the balance sheet. But for a lot of them, they bundled them up and sold them off. You're right. That whole thing came to a screeching halt. Actually, Bush 1, the first Bush presidency, put a pilot program in place that became the direct loan program that Clinton really put in place. So they're talking about that and saying, why is it that the U.S. Department of Education is the largest lender? It's crazy, 1.6 or 7 trillion dollars worth of debt. This is just a huge amount of money being administered by something called the Department of Education. It's not even the Treasury Department, Bob. It's literally on the balance sheet of the United States Department of Education. And so I think a lot of people have been uncomfortable about that over years because they don't have bankers overseeing that portfolio. They have other people who have ideas about what students might want or might need. And then the last part of my little harangue here is that President Biden tried to undo that. A year ago, we would start to show the scorecard all the time. We'd say, John, how many loans and how much billions of dollars did President Biden forgive last month? And the answer almost always was $5 to $7 billion for this. So he forgave $185 billion worth of loans. It's a big number.
So I wonder if they went to a privatization type model, if you're going to see actual underwriting come into play. Because right now, as you know, to get a loan is you barely have to have any credit qualifications for it. But I wonder if you go through a privatization through the banking system, if all of a sudden you got to really be able to get approved for one.
Yeah, and I think there are two parts of that equation, and this is where it always gets muddled. And honestly, at mycollegecorner.com, we try to write articles to try to separate this out to make it easier for people to understand. But there are really two loan programs, one for students and then one for parents. Right now, the one for students is not credit underwritten. There's a criteria in there. If they're very highly needy, they could get a subsidized loan, which means the government pays the interest while the kid's in school. But for the students, you really can't have an underwriting criteria. It has to be something set up so that just about everybody can get a loan. Maybe they'll have some income thresholds, or they'll figure out a way to say, we don't really think Bill Gates' kids should be eligible for a loan. But that's for the students. On the other side of that are the parent loans, and that's where the real controversy is. And the reason for that, Bob, is that on the undergraduate student side of the house, there are caps each year on how much a kid can borrow. A freshman can only take $5,500, a sophomore $65,000, juniors and seniors $7,500 each year. So they're capped out at about $30,000 in total borrowing. On the parent side, there is no cap. It's all the way up to the cost of attendance. And as you said before, unless you have some very bad, serious delinquencies on your credit profile, you're going to be able to get a loan no matter what your income is, no matter how many kids you have, for as much money as you want to borrow. And you and I have talked about this before. I've been sort of on the anti-plus loan bandwagon for a long, long time because I think it takes advantage of families who want to do the best for their kids.
Right.
And they put themselves in a financial bind because it's readily available and it's from the government, so it must be good. And I don't think it really is.
Talk a little bit about the second idea, if you will, is to move the management of student loan debt to, say, the Treasury Department. What would that look like?
Yeah, I think the general concept of that is to segregate what the strengths and weaknesses are of the different departments. And I'll say it this way, sort of in the current environment without a lot of political bomb throwing. So what makes sense? Well, you have the Treasury, they're debt issuers, they know about finance, they have bankers and those who are trained in finance working there. So the idea is that they would be able or should be able to set up risk programs and figure out how to manage that debt more appropriately than someone who's sitting in the Department of Education, right? That I think that bottom line, that's what it is. It's like who does what better and who's better trained to do that.
So talk a little bit about the parent and the child that's still in school. They're looking towards this next year. They're going to fill out the FAFSA and do all that and apply for whatever loans. Do you think they have really anything to worry about?
At the end of the day, I don't think that they do. And the reason for that is what you said earlier. It's going to take time. When that whole order came down, what was it, day 2 or 3 of the administration, that we're going to put a hold on all grants, right? And there was a day of whole tumult in the education business. And the questions were, does this mean that they won't give out any more loans? What's going to happen with the Pell Grants? There was a lot of energy about that. And the Department of Education, to their credit, within several hours, put out a statement that said, this does not affect student loans. It does not affect any of the Pell Grants. Those payments are going to continue to be made. The reality is, no matter how much shock and awe you want to put into a system, I don't think anybody in Washington, I mean nobody in Washington, could sit there and say, we're going to cut out the student loan program starting July 1, 2025. Good luck getting to college.
Yeah, that's true. This is Bob.
I just don't think they can do it, no matter what. And they're going to have to keep the grant program. And to get to your very first point that you made before, and I thought it was a good way to frame it, I could see a system where they're going to say the poorest kids are just going to get grants. They're not going to be eligible for loans. They shouldn't have to repay loans. There's going to be a big group in the middle. We're going to say, you know what, you get a good job, you should be able to pay these loans, so we'll give you the money, but we want to see it repaid. And then the last group are those, again, I keep saying Bill Gates, but there are lots of billionaires around who really don't need a loan program to get their kids in and through school.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm talking to John Hupalo about everything happening in Washington, especially with student loans. And if you want more information, mycollegecorner.com is where you go. So, John, talk a little bit about the SAVE program that Biden floated out there at the very end of his presidency. That seems like something that's really on the ropes.
Yeah, it's on the ropes, and if there's one sort of easy money prediction or bet here, it's that program will not go into effect. I don't know, Bob, we're on a Christian radio station, if I could say hell-bent, but I'm going to say that President Biden
You'll be okay.
was hell-bent.
Thanks for asking.
Okay, good. But he was absolutely hell-bent on this idea of loan forgiveness. And he was trying to do it, and I think in some ways, in some of the programs he enacted, it was actually necessary for kids who got cheated or didn't get a degree. And there's a lot of bad stuff that was going on, and some of that was, I think, appropriate. But some of it was literally just to keep the campaign promises. And the SAVE program, the acronym was Saving on a Valuable Education. 8 million borrowers are currently enrolled in that program, which is on hold, because the Supreme Court didn't want to rule on it, and it's tied up in the legal system. And there's some speculation that the Attorney General and the new powers that be at Department of Justice will withdraw their complaint against it so that there won't be a court ruling and the program can just die on its own. But what it did was, for these 8 million borrowers, it basically cut their payments in half from 10% to 5% interest if they were over the poverty line by a certain amount. It was like 225% of the poverty line. And it also had a loan forgiveness on the back end. So if you didn't make all the payments by whatever it was, 20 years, I forget exactly, that you would not be eligible you would be eligible at that point for loan forgiveness. Now, the Republicans have said, hey, we actually want to streamline all this, and this could be one of the really good things to come out of this whole conversation. Right now we have 7 or 8 different repayment programs, and it's very confusing, and borrowers get confused, and the servicers don't do it right, and so it's a big mess. There should be one repayment program. It should be based on income and family size, not necessarily on what the size of the balance of the loan is, because what really matters is how much money do you have and how many other mouths are you trying to feed while you're in the middle of making these payments. So they have this idea that it's going to be a program based on income, and it won't have a forgiveness on the back end of it. So you pay until you've paid off your loan. And again, the Republican mantra, or conservative Republicans around, you borrowed, you pay, unless there's extreme circumstance. That's the kind of program that I think you'll see emerging from the ashes here. And from my perspective, Bob, I think that could be a great thing. The reality is, if you can only borrow $30,000 or $35,000 from the federal government, and you have a job, and most undergraduates now, their starting salary is $40,000 to $50,000 plus. So almost all of them are exceeding whatever they've borrowed. And that metric that we've talked about a while ago is, most people think a loan is affordable if it's less than the actual starting salary of the student. So if they're making $50,000 but they borrowed $30,000, you'll find that most of them will be able to make those payments very comfortably over the course of time, and they'll be able to pay off those loans.
I got about a minute left, and I want to touch on this because you've brought it up a couple of times. The Parent Plus loan, do you see any meaningful changes with that?
I think for sure, if not in the very near term, I think there's almost no doubt that we'll see changes to that program to tighten that up a little bit, if not a lot, over the course of the next 6 months to a year.
Once again, John's website is mycollegecorner.com. And I got about 20 seconds. Tell the listeners what they can find at your site.
Thanks, Bob. MyCollegeCorner.com. There are webinars there. There's blog posts every week, and there's also great tools like a scholarship search engine, a FAFSA completion type of calculator can estimate what the student aid index will be. So please go check it out. It's all free. We don't collect any data. We don't sell it. Come use it, get the benefit, and hopefully you'll be helped.
John, always a blessing to have you on the program. Thank you for giving up your time, and we'll talk to you next month.
Look forward to it, Bob. Thank you.
This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining me today. John is a real blessing, and he brings a wealth of experience and knowledge in this area. We're lucky to have him come on each month. If you got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.